flashbacks to a primary school. Andrew Urquhart, your B's look like sixes. What is this scrawl that you're producing, as I had to practice and trace over the letters to see if I could get better at my handwriting? If you can see my handwriting now, it didn't work. But there is a call for perhaps compulsory cursive to come back into our school curriculum. And yeah, interested in your views on this one. But joining us on the program now is our literary correspondent, Elizabeth Kirkby McLeod. Libby, kia ora. Thanks for your time today.
Good morning, Andrew. I'm just looking at some of my notes, and I think my handwriting probably hasn't improved either. Despite my teacher's efforts.
What was your experience at school? You're probably far too young for compulsory cursive back in the day, but did you do that sort of, hey, you've got to trace the letters and all that type of stuff? Was that a happy memory for you, Libby?
So I'm like you. It didn't seem to matter how hard I tried. I just couldn't have nice handwriting. But I was doing some research, and interestingly, over the last 20 years, 90% of teachers that have trained said that they have had no training in how to teach handwriting.
Wow.
So if you've been through school in the last 20 years, it probably isn't an experience that you've had because your teachers just haven't been trained to do it. But certainly I'm a little bit older, but like you. And so I do remember, and I actually remember cursive being taught how to join up the letters, how to do that, that crazy F that would connect.
Oh, yeah.
In the interesting connect, yeah.
yeah, I can remember it, but yeah, I don't know if it looked like any letter of the alphabet. I mean, this is a challenge, really. It's one thing, I suppose, for the Education Ministry to say, okay, we're changing the policy, but if they don't have the teachers trained on how to implement that policy, may have a bit of catching up to do, right?
Yes, it was quite interesting. I've had this experience with my own children where there was one of my children, we were worried about his handwriting. We went to talk to the teacher.
Yeah.
And, I said, how about start using a computer more? Or how about we look at voice to text?
Okay.
And we were like, or how about we just work on his handwriting? That didn't seem to be, like they didn't actually seem to be particularly worried about the state of his handwriting. They're just looking for other solutions.
Yeah.
And so I think that's definitely been the focus. So it will be a shift for everybody, for parents, students and teachers, if we move back to compulsory handwriting. But there are some legitimate research reasons why it's being discussed.
Now, I know fine motor skills is a big part of it, and in defence of my gender, apparently little boys develop their fine motor skills slower than little girls. That's why, as a generalisation, guys have worse handwriting than girls. I'm sticking to that excuse for the rest of my life, just saying. Having said that, it's a little bit chicken and egg, because I've heard an argument which says if you practice handwriting, that helps you develop better fine motor skills. This may actually be helping our development, not just in the area of writing and communication, but I suppose the way in which our brains and our hand-eye coordination and all that sort of thing works.
Yeah, so apparently there's an educational researcher called Helen Walls, and she said that children who learn by handwriting all outperform other groups of students who practice in the same words either by typing or, say, letter blocks, or blocks that have letters and they sort of put them together to make words. So there does seem to be something with the physical act of forming letters that, I guess, lights up parts of our memory, also our learning parts of our brain. Now, this is interesting because we have similar discussions when it comes to e-readers, and research has shown, I was having a look at some research that showed that people that read a story on an e-reader versus on a paper book could not recall the plot as clearly. And so, of course, that has implications for, say, if you're using an e-reader or electronic learning always for learning something like maths that has cause and effect. Are you learning it as you might be learning it if it was on paper? I think it is important in all this discussion to say, though, that universal reading and writing is only about 500 or 600 years old, which really isn't actually that old. And so the ways in which we learn and our brains work to do with literacy is actually in the scale of human history fairly recent.
And to be fair, I think I'm very guilty of being able to go, well, back in my day, And things were much better back in my day, so maybe we should, I don't know, go back to that as a way of improving things, which may not necessarily be an accurate measure. Interested in your practice, though, if you are writing, if in particular poetry, if you're wanting to take words and assemble them and play with their sounds and their meanings, is that going to be a keyboard or a big HB pencil and a yellow legal pad? How does that creative process work for you? How do you express yourself, Libby?
Yeah, so you're quite right. When it comes to poetry, I like to write with a pen and paper.
Yeah.
And partly that slows me down. Now, of course, I actually find typing unlocks my flow. So if I'm writing longer pieces, it unlocks my flow because I don't have the greatest handwriting and spelling. And word processors are amazing for fixing those sorts of things. So you get to focus on the thoughts as you're trying to put together an argument or a longer story, instead of on the form and function of the words. When it comes to poetry, form and function are just as important as the words that are on the page.
Yeah.
And so that's where slowing down and really thinking about form and function, how it looks. Poetry is so much about how it looks on a page.
Yeah.
But so I depends what I'm writing. And it's interesting because a lot of writers are moving to voice to text.
Oh, yeah.
And so they find that thing. They'll find if they might go for a walk and they'll voice to text as they're walking. And that physical act of walking unlocks the ideas and they're able to get them out through speaking, and then they can come back and look at them. One thing that I always do is edit on paper and pen.
Okay.
And I think that just simple act of looking at your work on a different medium helps you notice different things about it. So I would recommend to anyone who's interested in writing, never stick to one medium. Don't just think, well, I like the computer, so I'm going to do everything on the computer.
Yep.
Because even with my poetry, I find if I've written it, when I go to type it up, I notice things that I didn't notice on one medium. So medium switching, I think, is really helpful for just making you look at your work in a new way.
Yeah. I think I wanted to get your thought on this because I'm wondering whether or not predominantly doing things through a keyboard or, as you say, voice to text has changed the way in which literature functions, particularly prose, that it's more of a train of thought. It's rather than it being more carefully crafted, rather than thinking and choosing specific words and really getting into the details of that. As long as we're communicating the idea and moving the plot forward, those things seem to matter so much in contemporary literature as perhaps they once used to. I mean, last time we were chatting about the classics. Back in the classics, each sentence was a work of art written in beautiful cursive handwriting.
Well, one thing we have to remember too, when printing first became a thing, sometimes the words that were chosen or even the way that they were spelt was just to make things line up on a page. So I think this idea that, that technology, whichever kind of technology it is always going to influence our writing. But if you look at a lot of contemporary literature these days, you will notice that it's starting to do away with things like capital letters, speech marks. You'll find a lot of modern books try to get away from using speech marks at all. And that can be a different way to read. It certainly takes your mind a bit to get used to not having. I personally don't like, a lot of poets have given up on capital letters, and I don't really like that. I still like my good old capital letters. I like my good old full stops. It helps me to it's how I think, right? It helps me to think. But they're doing away with those things. They're experimenting with those things because there is this idea that language doesn't have to be static, and the way in which we put words together doesn't have to be static. I hope we don't get to a point where we just do everything in emojis, but
oh my goodness.
We have to be open to the fact that the way that we have done things and the way that we have put language together, it's not like there's a final good and perfect way, and it's always evolving.
That is a dystopian world that you speak of, where we communicate literature through emojis. Just another idea I wanted to throw out there, and very much showing my age, the discipline of using a typewriter. Now, I very much enjoy using a typewriter. Firstly, if I get it right, then it's more legible than my handwriting for a start. But I suppose the thing with you working on a computer, it's autocorrects, it's copy-paste, you can move things around and these sorts of things. If I'm going to do it on a typewriter, I need to have thought about what I'm going to say, and I need to be concentrating on what that's going to look like on a page. It's almost like a different process mentally to do something on a typewriter than is either handwriting or working on a computer. I'm a big fan of that as a discipline, but it's, of course, very much out of vogue at the moment.
I don't know that it is. Tom Hanks wrote a book. He's very obsessed with typewriters, loves them, collects them.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book, short stories, in which each short story had something to do with a different kind of classic typewriter.
Wow.
So there we go. Maybe you and Tom Hanks are just leading the charge. Maybe it'll be the new retro revival.
It could be. I think that's probably the only thing that Tom Hanks and I have in common. But hey, appreciate your commentary, Libby. Thank you very much for what you do. Thanks for joining us on the program today.
Thank you, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.